Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Sachit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. So we saw in our previous class, Sister Nivedita is saying that just as in the case of the Buddhist missionaries, the impelling force that drove Swami Vivekananda to foreign lands was the great personality of his master. Just as Buddhist missionaries were inspired by the great life and teachings of Buddha, Swami Vivekananda also was inspired by his master's wonderful life and message. And Sister Nidita says, it was the great personality of his master at whose feet he had sat and whose life he had shared for many years. Many years in the sense he came rather late. He came in first time, I think in 1881 or 82. Before that, and Sri Ramakrishna lived only for 5 years after that, 5 or 6 years at the most. So he says, he tells Nivedita in one place that I had to struggle to learn all the things from my master, and I fought very hard because of his rational mind. He almost opposed everything that Sri Ramakrishna told him. He did not accept it without any proof or without any experiential proof. So he says, I fought so hard with my master. Once Sister Nivedita was finding it difficult to accept certain things which her guru told her to follow. So she was expressing her sort of lack of faith in what he said. He says, don't worry, the same thing. I also struggled for about 6 years and finally accepted when it was experientially verified in not only Sri Ramakrishna's life, but even in my life, all the experiences of the great truths and the great message he spoke. Only after that I accepted it. So the religious ideas of the Hindus on which he was supposed to speak, which was his theme at the Chicago Parliament of Religions, and was not the characteristic of the Orthodox Hinduism at that time. It was a first time in history, she says, where Hinduism itself formed the subject of generalizations of a Hindu mind of the highest order. So his was such a highly developed mind. And with that mind, when he saw the universal life and personality of his master, then all the orthodox ideas which were rather exclusive, they were not all inclusive, they were all shattered, and he understood the true significance of the ideas of the Vedas, or more popularly known as Sanatana Dharma, the eternal religion, or Hinduism. So Hinduism became the subject because he spoke on Hinduism. And in fact, all the talks that he gave in the Parliament of Religions, except for a few talks in which he also spoke of Buddhism. So after his successful Chicago participation in the Chicago Parliament of Religions, in which he was a hero, in the sense he was the only one who convincingly spoke of the universal aspects of Hinduism, not as a faith or a belief or a dogmatic belief, and not as a not in a very exclusive way, but in an all-inclusive way. So Swami remained in America after his Chicago participation in the Chicago Parliament of Religions in September 1893 till 1895, when he came to Europe for the first time in September. He found his way to England. A month or so later, he began to teach in London. We all know that in 1895, when he came in August from Paris, he first stayed for about 7 weeks, that's more than a month, in the house of E.T. Sturdy in Maidenhead. uh, which was in Reading, sorry, in Reading near which was known as Caversham. Then he stayed for a few days in Maidenhead as well. But then finally he decided that to shift to London, and with the help of Sturdy and Miss Henrietta Muller and others who rented several premises for him. And during his different visits to London, many times he visited London, England 3 times. And some of the places kept on changing. He stayed in Wimbledon for quite a length of time. He stayed in Pimlico, he stayed in Westminster, and several other places which were and they were convenient to him, so that he could, or the talks could be organized in some nearby hall. For example, the Princess Hall in Piccadilly, which was a huge hall which could accommodate about 1,500 people. So he knew that if he stays in London, it would be easy to commute to these places. And that is why I decided to shift to London. And it was during in 18. Now we come to the second chapter. After a note she has written to the Western readers, she now starts his biography as she saw him, the master as I saw him. So Margaret Noble, as she was then known, she was already famous in the literary circles. She was the founder of Sesame Club and many other activities, schools, kindergarten schools for young children. She was an educationist, an activist, and intellectual personality, a writer who had a even though she was quite young when she met Swami Vivekananda, she was a very dynamic personality and well known in the intellectual circles, including Bertrand Russell and all the people who lived at that time. Of course, she was known to some of, later on, she was known to some of Swamiji's disciples as well, with whom she had a wonderful bond. So it is, then she says, it is strange to remember, and it is surely my good fortune, that is what Nivedita writes, that though I heard the teachings of my master, Swami Vivekananda, on both occasions of his visits to England in 1895 and 1996, I yet knew little or nothing of him in private life, his private life, until I came to India in the early days of 1898. So she says, though she met Swami Vivekananda several times, in fact, he also stayed for a few days in Wimbledon and used to visit her very often. But she did not know him because she did not get an opportunity to live closely with her master. So she knew very little until she went to India on January 26. She reached in 1898. She reached India for the first time, and after that, till Swami Vivekananda passed away in 1902 July, she had a lot of contact and a lot of trips she made with her master. That is how she came to know about the personalities or the personality traits of her master, which she records in this book. What kind of person he was, her guru was, and his teachings as well as his wonderful life, they are described here in this book uh, through the eyes of Margaret Noble, or who later on became Sister Nivedita, known as Sister Nivedita. So she says, my master stands out in my memory against his proper background of Indian forest, city, and highway, an Eastern teacher in an Eastern world. So though she saw him in the Western uh, places, especially in England, in London, and many other places, wherever she had an opportunity to listen to him, her memory is about her, about her reminiscences of him against his proper background, that was Indian, the Eastern background, the Indian forest and Indian city of Calcutta, of course, and the highways. And he was for her an Eastern teacher who lived in an Eastern world. That was her lasting impression, because though she was first influenced in London, it was only in India after she left and reached India in 1898 January. Her reminiscences were recorded. I mean, not only recorded, but Swami Vivekananda created a deep and lasting influence. He totally transformed her from Margaret Noble to Sister Nivedita. So even in a far away London, indeed, the first time I saw him, that's what she writes, the occasion must have stirred in his mind, as it does in mine, recalling it now a host of associations connected with his own sun-steeped land. Means even when he spoke in London, the his associations with the wonderful land and the uh, spiritual ambience of India and the Eastern thought, they were closely, I mean, that association was still strong. So, in not only in his mind, but he could recreate that situation, that Eastern situation, even in the heart of London, where a small group usually met for conversations, and that is where Nivedita met him for the first time. And she describes how she met Swami Vivekananda for the first time. The time was a cold Sunday afternoon in November, and the place, it is true, a West End drawing room. So this is a typical situation where Swami Vivekananda found himself surrounded with some eager listeners, some eager Western disciples or listeners. Most of them were listeners, some of them were intellectually attracted to him, some of them became his lifelong disciples. But anyway, it was the Western drawing room where she found him for the first time, not in the Eastern setting, which was totally different. According, we'll see how why she says that. But then he was seated facing half circle of listeners with a fire on the hearth behind him. So there was a fireplace behind, and maybe it was because it was very cold, and the fire was burning, and he was sitting there surrounded in a semicircle with his Western admirers and devotees who were asking question after question, breaking now and then into the chant of some Sanskrit text in illustration of his reply. That is what she distinctly remembers, that now and then when he was trying to explain something, he would actually quote the verses from the scripture, some Sanskrit text, and then go on to elaborate or explain it to them. So he says, the uh, she to the scene, she feels that he might have felt that as twilight, the talk was in the evening, as twilight passed into darkness, she says he might have felt that this curious group of Western people, he might have felt, that's what she imagines, that he might have felt that he is surrounded by eager listeners in the Indian setting. Around sundown, normally most of the talks would be during the Sandhi period. When there is twilight, people used to finish their work and surround the village sadhu or a holy man who would sit under a tree, and perhaps at sundown or at sunset, the uh, tired people who had worked the whole day would come and relax and listen to the wonderful wisdom which would give them, would renew their energy. So she imagines that her mind uh, tries to recall that the setting, though it was a West End drawing room with a fireplace behind, perhaps this was the same setting which Eastern people, eager Eastern disciples uh, would be enjoying in the evening. So then she says, never again in England did I see the Swami as a teacher in such a simple fashion. I mean, the first meeting created a lasting impression. She felt that she was as if in India, in an Eastern home, though it was a Western drawing room. She felt the situation, the fire burning behind. She was transported, as it were, to India, because she had read about India, though she had not visited India. But then afterwards, she says, I could not have this opportunity of meeting a small group of eager listeners that setting was changed, because after that he became so busy that he would lecture in very huge halls and huge auditoriums, and there was so much of formality, the typical British formality, which normally when there is a large audience you have to observe. You don't have that informal setting of gathering in a small drawing room, eager listeners, which she had for the first time when she first met him. So she says, afterwards I never saw me, my master, in this simple setting. It was always a big hall, or uh, only the first time when I met him, she says, there were only 14 or 15 guests. It was a small gathering, intimate friends, many of us, as he sat amongst us in his crimson robe. His robe was not the orange or the girua color, it was slightly maroon color, crimson colored robe. And he had a girdle which he used to tie around his. It was a coat, and because of the cold, he wore a coat over his Indian dress. And then he, of course, wore trousers also. Uh, so, and then he says, now and then he had a curious habit which he had from childhood. Now and then saying Shiva, 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 and wearing that look of mingled gentleness and loftiness. He was gentle, simple as a child, but at the same time he was so grave, and he had a lofty look uh, in his demeanor. He appeared as if he was a very serious person, but at the same time, when he said Shiva, 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 now and then he used to repeat that. So, and that mingling of gentleness and the simplicity of a child and a stately and lofty loftiness which she saw in him, that was the first impression she had. Then he says, it appeared that he had just come down. Those who live much in meditation, she was convinced that here is a person who spends most of his time in meditation when she saw her guru for the first time. So that look which monks have or people have when they meditate for a long time, he appeared to have that kind of countenance. So that afternoon, it is now 10 years ago, only fragments of what he talked come back to me. She's trying to recollect very hard what was that he spoke in that meeting. But never to be forgotten are the Sanskrit verses that he chanted for us. Because that those Sanskrit verses normally he would not be chanting in larger gatherings. Because it was a close gathering of known people, he would chant those Sanskrit verses in those wonderful Eastern tones. It was new for her, this kind of music. Though Swami Vivekananda said it resembled the Gregorian chants when the rishis chanted. But Swamiji, perhaps since he was chanting solo, normally all the Gregorian chants, uh, the, the, the Vedic Samaveda and other Vedic hymns are chanted which look similar, which sound similar to those of Gregorian chants. But when it is sung by an individual, not in a group, not in a chorus, as they used to do when it was sung in the Vedic age. So he says, at once so reminiscent of, yet so different from the Gregorian music of our own churches. Though it reminded her of the old Gregorian chants, but of the churches which she was used to. But she says it was quite different. So different. It was so different because it belonged to a different culture. Then she says she remembers this distinctly, this wonderful chanting, which was perhaps for the first time that she was hearing. He was quite willing to answer a personal question and readily explained in reply to some inquiry that why he was in the West. Because he believed. Now, when some people asked him the question, why were you in the West? Why have you come to the West from an Eastern home and typically Eastern ideals? What do you think you can do here? We have our own spiritual values, we have our own culture. Do you think there could be exchange of ideals here? She said, because he believed that the time had come. Then he answered them by saying he explained why he had come. He said the time had come when nations were to exchange their ideals, as they were already exchanging the commodities in the market. So just as East India Company was started basically to trade with the Indian nation, to bring things which were not available in England, like spices and other things, and export certain things. So there was an exchange uh, by way of trade, exchanging the commodities of the market were being exchanged. So Swamiji told them, just as the world is coming closer and exchanging commodities through trade, international trade, the time has come for an exchange of ideas of the East and the West. That is what he explained to Swami Vivekananda explained to Sister Nivedita. He remembers this because he remembers some people asking him this question. Naturally, people were curious to know what is the purpose of his visit. Why has he come all the way? Why is he struggling so much to explain some ideals which are not very common to the English people, to the Western people in America, in Europe, and in England? So he says, since commodities can be exchanged, why can't ideals be exchanged? His idea was to exchange the spiritual ideals, take whatever is good from the West and give whatever is good from the East to them. So that this exchange will be useful for both the uh, East and the West. That was his idea. From this point onwards, then she continues that the talk was easy. He was elucidating, then they found the things easy. He placed his ideas, his ideals in the proper context. He said, I have come here not to convert you to my way of thinking, but to promote a healthy exchange. And that is why he was so popular, because he did not come with a dogmatic approach to make people accept his ideas, what he thinks is great and true. His idea was, no matter how great or how noble your ideas are, you have to listen to other people and see and exchange some good ideas which you might get from other cultures, other nations who have their share to contribute to the world. It may not be the same thing. Some nations contribute, some nations, some cultures, they have a unique contribution to make, and what is required is a total synthesis of these different ideals. So he was elucidating, explaining the idea of Eastern pantheism, picturing the various sense impressions as so much different modes of manifestations of the one. So people ask whether Indian religion is monotheistic or polytheistic, but pantheism is a better idea, where the different concepts of God, the different manifestations or modes of worship of God are nothing but the manifestation of one reality. That is known as pantheism. And then he quoted from the Gita and then translated the verse into English. All these means all these different sects within Hinduism or wherever they may have their origin in the world are threaded upon me as pearls are threaded upon a string. So it's a beautiful garland that we should seek, a garland of different thoughts, of different ideals, as manifestations, as they come together, as the string combines all of them, the core of each garland or the core of each pearl garland is the different colored pearls that constitute the garland. So it is only when they are strung and when we accept the garland as the complete whole, all are manifestations, the smaller versions of the one huge garland, which is the universal religion. That is what he came to preach, and that is what Sister Nivedita understood that day in that cold West End drawing room. It was on the location. Now there is, fortunately, that building has a blue plaque where Swami Vivekananda's visit is mentioned, that he lived here. He in fact lived there in that small place. It is now known as 64 St. George's Drive. It is in Pimlico, the St. George's Drive. That building fortunately has been renovated and it is still there in the original shape. The buildings nearby have made way for different other structures. They are not as they are. But fortunately, this 64 to 66 or to 64 to 67, all the parts where are now their shape, the original. They are still in that original shape. The buildings only they have plastered it perhaps or painted it from outside. Otherwise, basically, uh, people say it has not changed as it was when Swami Vivekananda received these 15 or 16 disciples who had come there, including Sister Nivedita. Then he says he told us that love was recognized in Hinduism as in Christianity. The idea of bhakti, the idea of divine love. He says it is the same as it is accepted just as Christianity accepts the divine love for God. Hinduism also recognizes that God can be loved. Not only we should not only try to understand the concept of God, but also love Him. Through our thought, we can worship Him. Through our emotions, also we can worship Him. As the love of God is the highest religious emotion. Religious emotions can be of various levels, but the pure love of God, as Thomas A. Kempis, he speaks beautifully in his book, The Imitation of Christ. In that book, Swami Vivekananda used to carry that book with him when he was a young man. He loved it so much because that spoke of the Dasya Bhakti, the attitude of a servant towards his master. That is known as Dasya Bhakti. So while he was traveling all over India, he said that this is a wonderful book. I find so many parallels in this book. And in fact, one of his disciples, who was an education inspector in the western part of India, Chaganlal Pandya, who was an educationist and was well versed both in English and the local language, he said, you should translate this wonderful book. Actually, that educationist was surprised. He said, why does a Hindu monk carry a book written by Thomas A. Kempis, Imitation of Christ? That is the name of the book. Along with Gita, he carried only two books because he was wandering all over India. He could not carry, obviously, could not carry many books, but two books were always there with him. One was the Bhagavad Gita, a copy of which he used to read daily, and the second was the Imitation of Christ. Now, this, when he came to Junagadh, that is a place in Gujarat, he was surprised. I mean, Chaganlal Pandya, the education inspector, he was surprised. He was an intellectual. He had, of course, read about Christianity, but he didn't realize that a Hindu monk would be so fascinated by this book. So when he asked him the reason, when a young group of people asked him, why is this book with you? Why are you carrying this along with Gita? Because nobody had taught them about the core values of Hinduism, the core universal values which are common to all religion. He said, see, I find so many parallels in this book. It is the excellent description of what Dasya Bhakti is. Just as Hanuman was devoted to his master, Sri Ramachandra, and there are so many wonderful texts describing, especially Ramcharitmanas and other books, where the devotion of Hanuman and his attitude towards his master, his all in all, Sri Ramchandra, whose welfare was the only sole pursuit of his life, that he saw a reflection of that in this great monk, Thomas A. Kempis, who wrote the beautiful book Imitation of Christ. His love for Christ, his capacity to sacrifice everything for the love of Christ, for the Christ's sake, that inspired Swami Vivekananda. And he was always of the uh, idea that wherever noble thoughts, like the Rig Veda says, the famous Rig Vedic term, where the Rig Vedic sage says, let noble truths come to me from all sides. Don't stop any noble idea, any noble thought, wherever you find it, in whichever tradition you find it, you accept him and make it part and parcel, synthesize it in your own life. That is what he believed, and he explained to him that don't go after this exclusiveness which is typical of the dogmatic religions. They are not typical of the original message of the founders. But when it goes into the hands of priests, they become dogmatic, they become narrow and exclusive. So to remove that, he told Chaganlal Pandya not only to translate the book into the local language, that is Gujarati, which he translated as Ishanu Sharanam, means imitation of Christ. But he also told him to give as footnotes parallels from Indian scriptures, because Chaganlal Pandya was well versed in the Indian scriptures. So he said, you do a great boon. I mean, it would be a great boon for people to live in harmony with each other if Christians understood that these ideas are there in the Hindu tradition, and Hindus also understood that these ideas of love of God, love for God, and a attitude of dasya bhakti, that is surrendering to the will of the master, to look upon God as one's own master, that he wanted to show that irrespective of the culture, irrespective of the religion that one belongs to, these ideas, noble ideas, are found in different parts of the world. So he, with that, equipped with this universal attitude, he uh, spoke to this small gathering in St. George's Drive in Pimlico, in that wonderful house which is still existing. And in that house, Sister Nivedita listened to him for the first time, and she was fascinated that here was a message which she had never heard of before. Everybody was trying to claim that his religion or her religion is superior and is the best. And we may tolerate other religions as long as they don't disturb our faith, and uh, but we will always continue to believe that our religion is the best. So to break that tendency, to break that exclusiveness, Swami Vivekananda uh, gathered all his audiences, starting from the Parliament of Religions in Chicago, where he declared it in front of 6,000 people, more than 6,000 people. His paper on Hinduism, his first address at the Parliament of Religions, he echoed those universal thoughts in all the meetings, wherever he went, whether he was preaching in crisscrossing America, the different states of America, or maybe Europe. Even he could even speak in French, and he participated in the Paris Congress of Religions in 1901. So he traveled through Europe and also in England, where he believed that his work will have a solid foundation. And in fact, it proved to be true. It was Sister Nivedita, who was one of his greatest disciples, who carried out his wish, his dream, uh, especially of education of women. And she did exactly what her master wanted to do, to help Indian women to come out of ignorance. And uh, her training in the West, plus the training she got from Swami Vivekananda and his Guru Bhais in the East, together it created a great personality of Sister Nivedita, who would be, who in fact became one of the fittest instruments for women's education in India, and to fulfill Swami Vivekananda's dream of women's empowerment in the true way, women's empowerment as his master showed through his own life, and as the Holy Mother Sri Sharda Devi demonstrated in her own life. That is why, if we see Swami Vivekananda, after Swami Vivekananda, it was Sri Ma Sharda Devi, after his passing away of her Guru, it was Sri Ma Sharda Devi who guided and gave a lot of strength, hope, and energy to Sister Nivedita to carry on her work till 1911 and 1910, when she passed away. But she worked very hard, having got the inspiration from her Guru, the universal message he spoke about. So that is why all her reminiscences are so useful, especially to a Western reader. It gives a wonderful perspective. She begins from London, how she was totally new, though she had read a lot about Buddhism and but it was all intellectual knowledge. It is one thing to understand these concepts through books, and another thing to understand or assimilate these teachings through direct experience from the mouth of a teacher or from the company of a holy teacher with whom she lived. Even though her contact with Swami Vivekananda, especially during the first meeting, was very brief, uh, because she had not yet become part of his group, like Sturdy and Henrietta Muller, who facilitated his stay and made small groups. But later on, in 1898, when she goes to India, she understands her master's message in depth. So then she says, he took up another topic. First, he explained how Gita says that just as different colored pearls can be strung by a string which holds them together as a beautiful garland, so also different ideas, different ideals should be which should nicely complement each other as in a garland. The second thing she told us is that body and mind, that is one thing she remembers. That is the difference between Buddhism and Hinduism. I mean, that is afterwards, but before that, she says that she observed one important idea which was new to her, that both body and the mind were regarded by Hindus as moved and dominated by a third reality, which is consciousness or the self. So, this idea that there can be something beyond the mind, that is the Atman or the self, it was a fascinating thing for her. And then he basically explained to the small group, because she doesn't remember everything that Swami Vivekananda said, but she says, these are the few ideas which were deeply imprinted in my mind. One is that both the body and the mind are regarded by Hindus as temporary, but there is a self which is the background of both the body and the mind. So the soul is not equated with the body or with the mind as it is done by certain religions, where a human being is considered to have a bipartite existence. Bipartite means there are two parts. One is the body and then there is the mind, which is as good as the soul. Whereas Hinduism believes in a tripartite existence. He said there should be something, because mind also is gross matter. So body, mind, and something beyond, which is pure consciousness. That is what Hinduism, that is where Hinduism differs from other religions. But describing the difference between Buddhism and Hinduism, which is an offshoot of Hinduism. Buddha was a Hindu, and he preached a certain philosophy which was, according to him, more pragmatic, and definitely it proved to be so. He saw that all the quarrels, people do not follow the core of religion. So he went to the core of Hindu religion and then discovered many things which later became part of Buddhism, because Buddhism was not created by Buddha. He just lived a life which gave him nirvana and showed people the way, which is nothing but the Upanishadic way, whether you call it nirvana or moksha, mukti or salvation. It is his experience which is more important. But people afterwards interpreting his message, they made him a founder of a separate religion, and the separation took place much later. So he says the difference between Buddhism as it was understood in those days and Hinduism, and I remember the quiet words. He says the Buddhists accepted the report of the senses. I mean, what she means is, unlike Hinduism, Buddhists accepted the report of the senses. That means the senses, whatever they see, though it is temporary, the acceptance of the fact that they are real, unlike Advaita, where they say it is just something transient, which is, you can say, anitya. Anitya means that which does not exist. It keeps on changing. But that Buddhism accepted. Its life is a sea of change. But somehow Buddhists, the later Buddhists posited a reality which which accepted the report or the impact of the senses on the mind. So in this respect, then Buddhism must have been in strong contrast with modern agnosticism, whose fundamental suspicion as to the subjective relation of the senses and therefore of all inference surely would surely bring it more in line with Hinduism. So modern agnostics, whose fundamental suspicion that they always suspect that how can you call it as a subjective illusion? The senses are reporting to me. I'm seeing the objects around me, and therefore it's inference that they are as true as any other reality you speak of. So it was a contrast to this. The Buddhists definitely did not accept that if you accept the sense pleasures or the desires and the reaction that you feel to the sense organs as the goal of life, then you will be miserable. The sorrow will increase. As Buddha said, it is like pouring oil into the fire. The fire is already burning. When you put some inflammable material in that continues to burn still more. So that is how samsaras, one, you cannot get rid of desires by increasing the desires. It will only make you miserable, and it will ultimately lead to increase of sorrow. So that Buddhism did not accept, and he says that is the common thing between Buddhism and Hinduism, that whatever may be the philosophical differences, they agreed on one point, that there cannot be nirvana, there cannot be true freedom, there cannot be moksha unless you get rid of the slavery you have to the senses. So the subjective illusion, the subject when it sees the panorama of the world outside it, it tries to, a illusion of reality is created on the soul. Whether you consider that soul to be part of a tripartite existence or a bipartite existence, as the Christians say, or the Semitic religions say, that you don't need a third entity. So whatever it is, the mind is compared more to a soul. The concept of mind itself as soul itself as an extension of the mind is typical of Semitic religions. So anyway, he says that agnostics could be easily defeated in an argument by not only by Hindus but also Buddhists, because in that respect, not giving credence to the input that we get from the senses is common between Hinduism and Buddhism. I remember, then he says, I remember he objected to the word faith, insisting on realization instead. He said, when somebody said, I belong to this faith, he said, no, you don't say faith. Faith is something which is a blind belief in something, that the faith as it is understood in the West. So he objected. He said, no, say realization. Realization means faith with conviction. Faith with conviction, when you see something, you can't deny it. When you experience something, no matter how much intellectual gymnastics you undergo, nobody can deny your experience. So realization or true spiritual experience, as against accepting a religion by faith, he made a huge difference, and he objected, said, don't use the word faith. It is as good as belief for Hindus. They say faith really does not matter. It may be a beginning point of your spiritual life, but ultimately it has to result in experience. I can't say I believe in God without seeing him. I can't say I believe in the soul without touching the soul or without experiencing what that soul is. So that is what Swami Vivekananda objected, and he did not allow his disciples to use the word faith in that sense, that you have to believe because somebody saw it, somebody has experienced it. Yes, it may be, but Swamiji was a bold rationalist, you may say, in the field of spirituality. He said, just because Moses saw certain things and somebody else saw a vision, that doesn't mean that it will help you in any way. Have you seen reality? Have you seen God? Have you seen that? Have you had the transcendental experience which Buddha speaks of, which Christ speaks of, which the Vedic rishis speaks of? Have you seen it? If you have seen it, then it gives validation. It doesn't remain just belief. It becomes a faith. A faith means shraddha. Not faith is not a proper word. Shraddha word is used, which is a conviction based on realization of what you believe. You may start with belief. There's nothing wrong. In that sense, faith is useful. Without faith, a man cannot progress in spiritual life. But that faith has to someday or the other, that faith should become a matter of realization. Only then that faith becomes concrete, and then nothing can deter you from going towards your goal. That is what Sister Nivedita says. So she remembers that he objected when the word faith was used in a very loose way as belief. He said, no, no, don't say that. Then he said something famous. He quoted an Indian proverb. Though here you should remember, by church is not meant the Christian church. It is meant a place of worship. So where rituals are performed and where you go for, you go with lot of sincerity, with a ritualistic attitude. That is what is he refers when he refers to church. You should understand it can be a temple also, any place of worship. So he said it is well to be born in a church, but it is terrible to die there. What does he mean? You should not take this literally. What Nivedita means, what she heard from her guru was that in the beginning you start with basic faiths and beliefs, but not to die in the church means don't surround yourself with these rituals eternally. A day should come when you should be able to convince yourself and tell yourself that the faiths or the beliefs that have been told to me while I am in the church or while I am in the temple or while I am in the mosque, I hear wonderful things. But should I die there in the church? I have to die in the sense, should I die all my life just listening to this? Should I not realize them? So he says that's why it's terrible to die there, means terrible to remain at that state where you hold on to rituals all your life and don't even try to realize the truths, the wonderful truths which are the core of those faiths or beliefs that you are asked to believe in. So it can be a starting point. You can live in a it's good to be born in a church in the sense you can get these ideas from the places of worship, but it would be rather bad if you simply continued that throughout your life without achieving anything. So in that sense, he says it is well to be born in a church, but it is terrible to die there. Anyway, then he says, I think after that, Nivedita says, she heard for the doctrine of reincarnation was touched upon in his talk. He spoke of karma, what karma is, how does it impact a human being. He spoke of bhakti, jnana as the three different faculties of the human soul, the three different paths which we have to follow at the same time, so that there's a harmony of yogas. You have to perform karma, that is with the idea that you are not the doer, a sense of egolessness or detachment. That is one way to do bhakti, that is love the Lord using your emotions. Do karma using your willpower to do something, and then follow the path of jnana using all your intellectual skills, thinking deeply about the problems of existence, the problems of death, problems of eternal life, problems of how to reach nirvana, moksha, mukti, and so on. These require a sharp intellect. Only a man of sharp intellect can understand this. But it has to be supplemented with other faculties of the human mind, that is devotion or willpower, development of the willpower, that is karma. So then he says he dwelt for a long time. Sister Nivedita remembers all these things. She may not remember the exact words, but she clearly remembers that he dwelt for some time on the infinite power that was within man, the infinite soul power, which we often don't manifest in our life. Power is there in a potential form. So that infinite hidden power which is there and which can be uh, made, that potential power can be used, it can be manifested outside through the power of yoga. The Karma Yoga, the Bhakti Yoga, Gyan Yoga, and finally the Kundalini Yoga or the Raj Yoga, through which the inner power, through the power of meditation, through the power of restraining power of the mind, it the more you restrain the thoughts and prevent them from getting scattered, the more power you generate within. That is the power of Raj Yoga. So then he says, he declared the one message afterwards of all religions to line the call to renunciation, which he believed, which Mahatma Gandhi also believed when he read. Somebody asked him, why have you named your Bhagavad Gita, the commentary you have written, your thoughts on the Bhagavad Gita as Anasakti Yoga. So he says that is the core of Bhagavad Gita, to be anasakta, to be not to be trapped by the senses and always remain a slave to the senses or even the body or the mind. So that freedom, that is not attainable unless one renounces the lower, then only we get the higher. Unless one renounces the lower, he cannot get the higher. So that is what uh, uh, the next thing she remembered, Swamiji said. Then she says there was a word to the effect that priests and temples were not associated in India with the highest kind of religion. So this is one thing which she remembers, because everybody, including the scientific community in Europe, after Renaissance, the idea that religion has to be rescued from the clutches of the priests, whose organized religion was becoming such a heavy burden on the people. In all religions, it has happened. It was the priestcraft that has taken control and forgetting the core principles, which are renunciation. The idea of renunciation, if it is not there, then priestcraft can lead to horrible evils. It can lead to power. So he says, there was one message, whether it was Christ or any other prophet, or also that one has to renounce. If one wants salvation or eternal, one wants to reach the eternal spirit, to get mukti, moksha, or nirvana, one has to renounce. There's no other way. If you see Buddha, he also preaches renunciation of the senses, the attachment to the senses. If you see Christ, he was one of the greatest renouncers. He even renounced his body. He did not even care, because he knew he was the spirit and he was worshipping his Lord as the spirit. So it didn't matter if he renounced the whole world. And in fact, that was the condition. When the apostles came, he said, sell everything that you have and then come to me, and I will give you peace. I will carry all your labor. Come, ye who are heavily laden. That's the famous biblical teaching. Don't carry that load of the world on you. The more load you carry, the more difficult it is to get peace in your mind. So he says, some of the disciples, some of the rich people also were fascinated by his wonderful life of the spirit, but they were so much attached. He said, sell everything that you have or give away everything you have uh, to the people and come unto me, those who are heavily laden. Heavily laden means there's a load of samsara on your head. You have so many self-created responsibilities, so many things to do, and they are dragging you there, crushing you by their sheer weight. So just drop that load and come. So most of the disciples who came, they renounced everything and come. But then some people refused, and Jesus told his disciples, see, he loves his money so much. He loves his things that is unable. He doesn't have the heart to give it up. But this message of renunciation, according to Swamiji, and that impressed Sister Nivedita very much. Then she decided to renounce her life. Though she was very active, she wanted to do this activity. But she found that unless one renounces, one can't get the power of the Vedic rishis. One cannot get the power of Christ. One cannot get the power of Buddha. They became great, the rishis became great because of this one quality where you gave up, not gave up the lower things for something higher. See, renunciation should not be always thought of in a negative way. I hold these things very dear to me, but if they are creating a load upon me, they are crushing me, and finally, when death comes, you are already crushed under the load of all these possessions and other things. So Jesus said the only way is to those who are heavily laden, just surrender to me, come after me, follow me, those who are heavily laden, and I will bear your cross. Means I will bear all the struggle that you need to do. I will, through my grace, save you all. That is the word of every, that is what every prophet said. So she remembered that this was, uh, he declared that the one message which every religion gives, irrespective of where it originated, was the call to renunciation. Then he says the he's added to that, the priests and temples and the ritualistic worship has dragged down the noble religion of these great founders and reduced them to some kind of materialistic uh, pursuit. Because most of the priestcraft and most of these people promise you something here, promise you some more wealth, more prosperity. So what's the difference? You can as well earn more money with your own efforts rather than go to God for all these silly things. For them, for him, these are doesn't have any value. So he says that is why most of the preachers in India have to renounce. Nobody listens to a priest. You may go to a priest in India, he says, in these temples, to marry off your daughter or to do some thread ceremony for your son. All this comes, they have to be done in India only by secular priests. You can't see a monk marrying off somebody or even giving the thread ceremony and all the social customs which most of the priests do to survive. For them, that is the baptism, and many things are done by the secular priests or the priests in India and every country in the world. They are done so that the organized church or whatever sustains them, to sustain that the external elements of religion, they can survive. But the core of religion was always associated, I mean, the associated with renouncers, those who had renounced the world. People used to tell, if a priest tried to give some spiritual advice, he said, first you show us in practice that you can renounce your home just as Christ did. Then you come and preach to us. We don't want to hear spirituality from you. We want to just get our material needs fulfilled. We have come to you for that. And that is what the priest did. The majority of the people, either in India, the masses don't want religion. They don't want spirituality. They want religion to help them meet their material needs. Some obstructions, some kind of problems have come. So if the priest solve this problem, then the priest uh, help them out also in some way or the other, through counseling and through some ritual which gives them some faith, and they, perhaps many of them, get what they want, the little toys of the world. But those who essentially speak about the core of religion, they can never be priests. So he says the desire to reach heaven was in our country always considered to be a very low pursuit. It was never, it never had any support in India. So we have come to the end. I'm running short of power now. So anyway, if there are some questions, I'll just answer. Just give me a minute. Yeah, there are two questions. Did Swamiji face any resistance or opposition by individuals or groups in England and back in India? Yeah, a lot of groups, but I think he had to face lot of resistance in America more than in India. In England, he made some very good friends. Revered Harveys, huge Harveys, and some of the priests and some of the fathers of the Unitarian Church and many other uh, members of the Church of England, they were very good friends. So he did not face much resistance. Only in the initial days, after the Parliament of Religions, till he got made some friends, he was practically alone. So he made a lot of people thought that he had come here to convert people, or maybe to convert people to the way of Hinduism. But the liberal people everywhere, whether it was America, Europe, those who believed in his universal ideas, they supported him. But definitely he faced resistance, because when you preach against priestcraft, you preach against all these things, naturally you will make enemies. Swamiji made a lot of enemies because uh, they felt that our lives, our exploitation of the people in the name of religion will suffer. So vested interests threatened him. There was not only resistance but opposition also by many uh, elements of society. But then finally, as the Indian proverb says, truth alone triumphs. So he was somehow or the other saved by the grace of his guru and also some noble friends like Nivedita and many other friends, Josephine MacLeod, the Hale family in America, and everywhere he went, some men of God who really wanted true spirituality, they always supported him. So he didn't have to suffer much. Now, there's another question. Jesus appears to be Sharanagati Bhakta of the Lord, does he not? Yes, Jesus, it is difficult to understand, but those who wrote the Imitation of Christ, most of the great saints of Christianity, they seem to have Sharanagati to the Lord as taught by Jesus. Jesus himself believed in the Father in heaven, but he was also a Jnani. He was not just a Bhakta. Bhakti was there, but Bhakti became more prominent in the saints, Saint Peter and all the saints who, with the exception of some saints who were full of knowledge, most of the saints were humble devotees of the Lord as preached by Christ. So you can't categorize Jesus as a Bhakta, a Sharanagati, and other ideals, though he spoke of that it's Father's will that will be uh, supreme in our life. But at the same time, he was a man of knowledge. When he said, go worship God by spirit, the kingdom of God is within you. They are all, there's more of jnana in that. The knowledge part of the Vedas was also expressed by him, not just bhakti. Yes. So there's one more question. Harry is asking this question. Does your guru decide what type of bhakti you need to perform? Also, in the meantime, while I'm waiting to speak to you, can I perform bhakti and chant mantras to the Divine Mother as part of my daily practice? I heard you cannot chant her mantra without initiation, but some people claim you can do so. So I currently pray to her, but don't chant mantras to her. You see, the thing is, some of the mantras are mystic in nature. There's nothing mysterious about it, but because they are very valuable, they are considered to be sacred and they are not just made public. Or even if they are made public, the effect of the mantra, unless it comes from a trained teacher or a guru, it does not help much. So the best way is to do prayer, pray to any god or any mother, the divine Prakruti, especially Prakruti. It's very good that you have devotion to the divine mother, because it is only with her help. Even Sri Ramakrishna said, if you read the gospel, without the grace of the divine mother, you cannot succeed in spiritual life. So whether you take initiation or not, to call upon the divine mother before initiation by simple prayer, as Thomas A. Kempis did. He apparently did not repeat any mantra, but his prayer was, "Oh Lord," or there are other great Christian pilgrims who say, oh Lord Jesus, have mercy upon me." So any English prayer doesn't have to be a mantra. Any prayer in any language, if it is done with uh, sincerity and with lot of devotion, that is more than enough. So currently you can definitely pray to the mother, to the divine mother, and there is no such thing as what kind of bhakti. Bhakti is just the emotional attachment you have to the Lord. There may be different modes of bhakti. You can follow all the modes, but better to stick to one. As bhakti of a child to his mother is known as Vatsalya Bhava, or you can say Santan Bhava, that I am a child of the mother. So that is one type of emotion. Or you are a friend known as Sakya Bhava, as Arjuna was a friend of Krishna. He always considered him to be a great friend, somebody on whom he could place his entire trust. So bhakti can assume different forms. They can be multi-pronged, but they can be, but normally one particular relationship, if it is developed like that of a child to the mother, if you believe in the divine mother, then that attitude, according to Sri Ramakrishna, is also a very good attitude, and that enables you to have a pure relationship with the divine mother. Now, Holy Mother said, if faith is there, everything is achieved. The clarification in today's class, that faith is not enough, it should be transformed into realization. How can we understand and put this? See, the faith which Holy Mother said is not the faith which we talk today. When Sister Nivedita and Swami Vivekananda mentioned the faith, it is a kind of belief. It is not just a belief, it is a conviction that if faith is there, that belief is there, and that conviction in that belief or conviction in that faith, which is known as Shraddha, it may not come from direct realization or experience, but it can come out of partial realization or an intuition. So you can say the word faith, as Swami Vivekananda used today, is belief. What he meant was the Christian idea or the Western idea of faith is something which you have to believe. But when Holy Mother said, if one faith is there, that means if that conviction is there, faith backed by conviction, may not be full realization, but some wonderful conviction that this is, I'm on the right path, I believe in the words of my Guru, and you get smaller experiences, may not be the highest experience, which will tell you that I am proceeding on the right path. So if that faith is there, that Shraddha is there. Unfortunately, the word Shraddha cannot be translated into English. Faith would be not a correct word. So faith, with it should be transformed into the highest realization. That is what Swamiji says. But Holy Mother says that even if you don't have the highest realization, a intuition which tells you from the bottom of your heart, not just intellectually, that if faith is there, you have everything. So that kind of faith increases your intuitive power of intuition, and as the power of intuition becomes more and more and more, suddenly you will get the realization. Not suddenly, over a period of time you will get this realization. So to put it into practice, to confirm or to emphasize again and again that my faith, my Shraddha is leading me to that goal, and to persistently follow it, that is faith. If somebody says I have faith and doesn't do it, doesn't repeat the name or does not pray to the Ishta, then that means he doesn't have faith. He has more faith in other things than God. But if you see in somebody's life, he's placing a majority of his uh, effort is going towards a kind of worship or kind of remembrance of his Lord, then you can say it is a result of some kind of intuitive experience which tells him, intuitively something tells him that this is going to help me, whatever be my condition. no matter how much sorrow will come to me, I shall transcend it with the help of faith. That faith is different, Shraddha. Now the last question is, uh, Pranams Maharaj, praying to material needs to be met is deep in human psyche, and ancient samskaras isn't so. As early men prayed to the sun, the fertile crops and food. Yes, they are there. They are there. We are speaking of the highest men. That is why Swami Vivekananda said, mostly Christ and Buddha, they came for the renowned, the all renouncers. They had no message for the common people. Not that they did not have, but they spoke more of the highest renunciation. So you can say in that way, Buddha has many ideas for those who renounce the world. So also Christ. Whereas the Vedas have a balanced attitude. They say majority of people will run after these things. Nothing wrong in praying to God for material needs. That is the only way that the burden will increase. When you increase your burden, when you can know, till you can carry that burden, a person can manage. He can manage to carry a rucksack and climb a mountain. But as he goes up, as he progresses in spirituality, the huge luggage which he was carrying becomes very tiresome. So people gather things around them. They run after these material needs, and there's nothing wrong. But the problem comes when the load becomes so much that a time will come when they will renounce. They have to renounce. Nature will force them to throw away those things. So there's nothing wrong when Jesus says, those who are heavily laden, drop your things and come after me. He was speaking to those people who were to be his direct disciples. Saint Peter, Saint Paul, and all the wonderful people. The message that they took was the message of renunciation. So also Buddha's disciples, all renouncing disciples, they got, if they want the highest, then you have to renounce. But if you don't want that, if you want partial truth, then it may take a longer time. And Vedas understand that. The priestcraft and all those things are there for people to satisfy their lower needs. Till they do it in excess, they are not just happy with the needs they have, but then greed makes them hold many things, lift so many things that they are burdened with that, then they are full of sorrow. There is a wonderful story. I remember having seen a cartoon where a monkey, a small film, a cartoon film, where a monkey, there's a jar, and the neck of the jar is big enough for the hand to go in. And the monkey puts the hand in and then grabs hold of the nice things that are there, the nuts that are there in the jar, and it takes a handful. It is very greedy. He could have taken a few nuts and removed the hand. It would have come out. But he wants all the nuts. So he grabs all the nuts in his fist. And when he tries to pull it, it has expanded. It is not coming out. And that foolish monkey doesn't understand that unless it leaves, throws away some of the nuts back into the jar and takes only a few which he needs and pulls the hand out, then he can not only pull his hand out but eat it also. So that is a great lesson. That is a wonderful story which we get in our ancient scriptures, that if you want to grab more than what you need, if your greed becomes prominent in your life, then the condition will be like that of a monkey. You can neither enjoy it, nor will you can remove the hand. You cannot be free. So that is the idea. One can ask for material things, but just what you need, not what your greed tells you. Then the load will be so heavy and you will be forced to give up all those things. Yeah. Could we say that the dogmatism and extreme formalism are the death of spirituality? Of course, if you think about it, the bureaucratization of faith has always turned off the spiritual life. Obviously, when bureaucrats and the people who try to formalize or regimentalize religion and do not allow religion to grow. See, for anything to grow, man needs freedom. If you force him to follow certain things, then we will not have scientists. Scientists should have the freedom to do their discoveries in a free atmosphere. Even to discover certain material things, you need freedom. So also religion, too much of control over the people, that dogmatic approach that you have to do this to reach God or to attain spirituality, that proved to be the undoing of all religions. All religious traditions, the moment they held on to dogma and blind faith, as opposed to true spiritual experience, and did not give freedom, then religion started degenerating. Though that's definitely, it has turned off the spiritual life. The spiritual core has suffered in such religious movements wherever they are, irrespective of the country, nationality, ethnicity. Every country where selfish people and extreme formalism or dogmatism has entered for several reasons. The reasons are also material, in the sense there is human greed, there is human desire for power to control other people. Formalism and this dogmatism comes only when you have to control other people. For your own sake, you don't need this dogma. You don't need any formality. You just approach God as a child would approach its mother. He's just concerned, he just wants to love his mother. We just have to love God and not try to formalize or have a regimental approach to religion. Then religion has a tendency, sometimes it helps in the initial stages, but after that it can become an obstacle in our freedom and in our creative freedom, which will lead to spiritual realization. Now, there's one last question. Did Swamiji ever face any racism when he was in the West? Definitely. He was, especially in many hotels, he was not allowed to go because they thought he was a black. He had a dark skin. So there's a very humorous incident. He took it very lightly. He knew that these people are ignorant and he did not waste his time quarreling. That is what Henrietta Muller wanted him to do. He did not believe in any kind of activism, because activism just drains away your energy. So he did not fight racism. He did not fight women's empowerment. He went to the core of these improvements. He says only when the human being realizes that he is divine, then all this racism, women's empowerment, and everything can be settled. So he focused more on the transformation of a human being rather than going in for this activism, which only results in opposition and quarrel and fights and all those things. So he did not bother. In fact, one wonderful incident I'll tell and I'll close. Once there was a small black boy who was outside and seeing Swamiji drinking coffee, and perhaps he was not allowed to sit inside and take, so he had to come out. The black boy observed Swamiji and he thought he is one of our own. He thought he is also black. And he, in his broken English, he said, a black man likes coffee, black boy likes coffee. So he just wanted to, and then Swamiji went and embraced him and said, yes, all or both of us like coffee and we are one. So he gave the feeling, he actively sympathized, and he looked upon these human beings as one, irrespective of their caste, color, creed, and religion. And once he was asked to leave, they mistook him for a black, and then somebody told him, so you should have told you come from India. They would have allowed you to stay. You're not a black. He said, no, I will never do it. I cannot rise at the expense of others. I sympathize with these people who are the victims of racism, and I don't want to tell that I am not a black. I would rather side with these blacks than listen to, get that entry to that place. He said, it doesn't matter. I will not give up and rise at the cost of somebody else. They are also my own as much as these whites are. But he did not have any hatred for racism. I mean, he did not hate the white people or any person, any caste, creed, religion, or religious denomination. His vision was synthetic. He did not believe. So, yeah. Just to clarify, Prakriti refers to the Divine Mother. Does it refer to all her forms? Yes, there are different forms of Prakriti, the destructive form, the creative form. So the concept of Divine Mother is a very big topic. On some other day we'll discuss. But in her natural form, she is known as Prakriti, and the different forms are different aspects of that same Prakriti. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.